Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic for you today. Let's do it. ER nurses of Reddit. How often do stories of one more minute and you would be dead of those get exaggerated? Please remember to like, share, hype, and subscribe.
I am Doc here. I had a guy who came in after feeling weird in the chest all day. 40s, athletic, in the middle of a divorce, stressed, EKG looked okay. I see non-specific chest pain all day long, and it's usually heartburn or stress or asthma or a strained rib muscle, and I was so close to sending him out with some Malox, but there was something about this guy that made me send him to the ED. I asked if he wanted a wheelchair escort, and he said no, he'd walk. It was about 200 feet. Anyway, an hour later, I logged back into his chart to see how things were going in the ED, and the first thing I see is a code note. He'd made it into the ED, gotten some blood drawn, and turned out to be having a mild heart attack. And while the doc was delivering the news and explaining next steps, he'd had a cardiac arrest. They got him back immediately, since having your arrest in an ED in front of an emergency physician is kind of a best case scenario. When I saw him again a week later, he was doing great, but told me that he'd almost gone to get some food, it was lunchtime, before going to the ED, but decided against it. If he'd waited, he would have had an arrest in a Jimmy John's, and things probably would not have gone so well for him. Anyway, almost 20 years of practice, and that's my closest call. Emergency call taker here. Most recent was a small child choking on some food. The ambulance my colleague sent was 10 minutes away, and the helicopter 15. While I was giving first aid instructions to the parents, my colleague called the local family doctor, who in a stroke of luck took a last glance at his phone before he would have gone for a run where he would have left it at home. He was there within a minute and managed to dislodge the stuck food. I recently had a patient carried in by her dad that was peri-arrest from anaphylaxis. Dad was uncomfortable using her EpiPen and thought he was close enough to the hospital to drive instead of calling 911. She had weak central pulses, no peripheral pulses, and her BP was 50 to 30s on arrival. She was minutes away from a bad outcome potentially. We did a lot of education, and she ended up okay. If you have an EpiPen, know how to use it. One story that I'll never forget is a family of 6, 2 parents, 2 kids, 2 grandparents staying over, who saved themselves from a collective carbon monoxide poisoning by sheer luck. Everybody was asleep. The mom got up to pee and fainted from the CO poisoning on her way back to bed. The sound of her fall woke her husband up, who checked on her and called an ambulance. The first responders' CO detectors went off upon arrival, and they evacuated everyone. If she didn't have to pee, they'd all be dead. If she just made a few more steps and reached her bed without fainting, they'd all be dead. If the husband had a heavier sleep and didn't hear her fall, they'd all be dead. If they thought the fainting was nothing, and she'd see a doctor the next day, they'd all be dead. Instead, I had them all in the ER casually recovering from a moderate poisoning, chatting casually about this unusual night they were having, completely oblivious to how close they all got to make the local news the next day. It was eerie. I'm a respiratory therapist and work in the ER. It's pretty common to have patients code in the ambulance on their way to the ER, but I think in these situations they know right away that things are bad and they barely make it. One of the paramedics who taught my CPR class said that since we're in a dense but geographically small municipality with 2 hospitals, the chance of surviving cardiac arrest is much higher than average. They call once they're in the rig, and they're outside the hospital by the time the report is given. My stepdad showed up at the hospital for a scheduled colonoscopy with a heart rate of 23. He was admitted immediately and given a pacemaker. Not really a 1-minute situation, but if he hadn't had the colonoscopy appointment, He would have stayed home alone all day and probably been dead by the time my mother got home from work. I was patient transport services in high school. My favorite was a guy who had gotten in a car accident and didn't have his bone sticking out of his arm. He did the "I'd have been dead in a few more minutes" and kept trying to have all services directed at himself. 1 hour later, they brought in his passenger who had his arm torn off and was impaled through the chest with a piece of a sign after they freed him from the wreck. He demanded starbursts and water ice at our earliest convenience. I never really saw this in the ED, to be honest. The human body is amazingly resilient, especially when it has some time to adjust. I had plenty of people walk in and I was like, holy shit, how long have you just been walking around like this? In my last job, I had a patient who was a VT arrest while visiting his mom, also our patient, on the telefloor of our hospital. It could have easily killed him if it had happened almost anywhere else. He came through it neurologically intact and in pretty good shape, other than needing a heart transplant. When I was 12, I spent a week throwing up strange colors and having cramps in my guts. At the end of the week, I woke up one morning and it hurt so much I couldn't even get out of bed. My mom was very alarmed, called her friend who said I was probably faking, and to see if I was better by Monday. This was Saturday morning. My mom fortunately decided to call an ambulance anyway, and I was rushed into emergency surgery as soon as I got to the hospital. That week of lead-up was my appendix telling me it was in distress, and Saturday morning it burst. According to what I was told later, another hour delay and I'd have been dead from the toxic crap my guts were swimming in. As it was, I spent almost 2 weeks in the hospital. ER doctor here. It is exceedingly uncommon to see a patient who would have died had they not come to the ER a minute earlier. I have heard numerous patients make claims like this, and in the rare case that it's both potentially relevant to their current care and I have enough time to look, I've looked up the relevant records, in precisely 0 of those cases would the person have died if they waited another hour. Another day? Sure. I've had one personal case where the guy would have died if he had waited any longer to come in. He felt odd, lightheaded, nothing specific. 40-something, generally healthy guy. Went into VFib right after he arrived. Shocked him out of it. He went back into fatal arrhythmia a few more times, but ultimately stabilized after more shocks and amio. If he hadn't arrived in the ER when he did, there's a high chance he either would have died or not walked out neurologically intact like he did.
I'm sure if you asked any professional in a field that you don't have that much experience or knowledge on about what seems like an emergency to you or a crazy situation would just be a Tuesday to them. But it's never lost on me the matter-of-factness and general calmness of emergency service workers, ER doctors and nurses. It's amazingly impressive, so can never go without saying thank you enough for all that you do.
Labor and delivery nurse here. I had a patient who was 38 plus 3 pregnant with twins. She was checking in for a routine induction. History of panic disorder and anxiety, but nothing else. Got her admitted over the next hour. She had some borderline hypertensive pressure, high 130s over 80s, and when I placed her IV, her heart rate went up to 130. Concerning, but in no way emergent, and possibly related to the panic disorder. With no obvious event or explanation, Baby A had a precipitous drop into the 50s. I went into the room, and her SATs were in the 70s, heart rate 178. Oof. We ran her to the operating room and delivered her emergently, then transferred her to the ICU. Final diagnosis? Acute heart failure, with an EF of 17%. It was sheer dumb luck that she was scheduled for an induction within an hour of her heart deciding to go crump. My lung collapsed and I thought it was anxiety when I finally ended up in the ER. I had to sign a paper and then into a room for an emergency chest tube. The urgency in which they worked around me definitely felt like one of those I could have died moments, but no one ever said it to me. I'm curious if it has ever actually been said to a patient out loud. ER nurse here. I'm of the opinion that I would rather you come in and have us say it's nothing, go home, than not come in when you really should. That being said, most of what walks through the front door could be treated at an urgent care during normal business hours. It's cheaper, I guarantee it. I've had 2 patients in my care that experienced those. One guy had a little upset stomach and general feeling crummy. Nice guy, really chatty. We put him through the CT, and I watched his abdominal aorta dissect as the images came up. The serendipitous part was that the trauma team just got finished with one guy, so they were all 2 rooms down. Guy brought in baked goods for the ER staff. A couple years ago, I had a 13-year-old boy come in one time after a skateboarding accident who had a sizable epidural hematoma, but was neurologically fine. Hospital I was at did not have a pediatric ICU, and I'm not a pediatric neurosurgeon, so was arranging for helicopter transfer. As that was brewing, he went comatose and blew a pupil, so I took him to the OR for a cranial evac, then straight to CT to confirm no recollection, then helicopter to hospital with PEDS ICU. He walked out of the hospital 2 days later, just the nature of epidural hematomas. If he had blown a pupil in the helo, not insignificant chance he would have had permanent injury or been DOA. ER nurse. All the time. I hear them in the ER because it's often the first thing people mention, and they'll go on to use terms that they heard from the doctor that they don't understand, but shows that they were fine. Then I'll look in their records and I'll find it to be BS. But it happens for sure. Maybe not 1 more minute, but 1 or 2 more days. I'll see that a few times a week, which, yeah, it's an emergency department. That's what we do. Not quite a minute or 2, but hours myself. I was so far into diabetic ketoacidosis before I was first diagnosed type 1, I was so weak I couldn't even make it back down the stairs to get to the ER after a doctor visit. I was in DKA for months before my body started to fail. My mother had left the state for the weekend, so I was alone and couldn't do anything. Thankfully, she came back when she did, because even the doctors and nurses said I wouldn't have made it another day. Spent almost a week in the ICU before I was even stepped down to the ER. ER nurse of 2 decades, to be honest, a lot. That being said, we often tell people these things to underscore the importance of them coming in. You have no idea how many people take 2 Tylenol for the chest pain and take a nap versus coming to the ER, or think the worst headache of their life will go away. I've had a few patients where it is literally, if they hadn't been in front of us, they would have died. A few. But in the end, I want people to know if shit seems weird, just come in. I have a story that happened to me. When I had my hysterectomy, I was sent home to heal. There was a lot of endometriosis, so the cut was huge and the doctor used staples to sew me back. I had an allergic reaction to the staples. My stomach was swelling up. I went back to the ER, but I had been swelling up so bad, I had started to break open from where they had closed the wound. At the ER, I was checking in and things went sideways fast. I started bleeding out in the ER waiting room. I woke up in the after surgery area and had to have a blood transfusion, several pints. I have several autoimmune diseases, so it's not crazy for me to have weird reactions to things. My doctor told me I'm the only person he had ever had who was allergic to surgical staples. My grandmother of at the time 80 plus years old had her second heart attack on the bus. She got off the bus at the next stop, which was the hospital, walked in and collapsed in the reception hall, was resuscitated there with AED and back home within the week. The cardiologist was amazed. My grandmother had bruised ribs and a great story. She knew that it was a heart attack because she had had her first when she was 65 and recognized the feeling. She had a couple more great years. I exaggerated one once on purpose and it saved my father's life. He woke up one morning feeling weird, no pain, no dizziness, just a consistent feeling of strangeness in his chest and stomach. He said it almost felt like indigestion. After drinking some water and the feeling not going away, He asked me to drive him to an urgent care facility. About halfway there, he says to me that he was starting to feel dizzy and he was getting tunnel vision. I knew he had a history of heart disease, so I made the decision to go to the ER instead. As I walk into the ER, the nurse at the desk tells me to take a seat and she'll call me when she's ready. There was already someone checking in at the desk and a line of people behind them. I knew that explaining the situation would take too long, so I pushed the person out of the way and told the nurse that my dad couldn't breathe. That got him rushed past the line and into an open room, where he was found to be having a heart attack. 2 IVs, a crash cart, and a defib later, he was stable. He was moved to another facility, where he had open heart surgery and has since made a full recovery. The doctor told me that it was already a razor-thin margin that he made it, and had I taken the time to wait in line, or try to make the nurse understand the whole story, he wouldn't have survived. This is before Uber and 24-hour urgent care centers. Got called out for an unknown medical around 3 in the morning. Arrive on scene to find a lady in her late 40s dressed, sitting in the lobby of a condominium building. She was staying in a friend's apartment for the week and didn't have a car. She was embarrassed that she'd called 911, but she was having such terrible indigestion since 11 p.m. and was afraid she had food poisoning. No problem. We load her up, get a set of vitals, and then she mentions that it doesn't get any better or worse when she lays down or sits up. That is a red flag in EMS. 99% of the time it means it's cardiac related. We hook her up to the EKG, and she's throwing tombstones. My partner and I look at the monitor, look at each other, and both go, shit. We started 2 IVs, aspirin, morphine, and booked it to the nearest hospital with a cath lab. When we came into the ED, the cardiologist is already there. He takes a look at the monitor, now running a full 12 lead, asks a few questions. We take her directly to the cath lab and she codes. We got her back after one shock, stabilized her, and then proceeded to perform the catheterization. I heard she did fine in the cath and made a full recovery. My one friend is an ER doc and the other is a surgeon, and they both are here watching TV while I'm playing on the computer, and the answer is ER doc. It happens. It's not the most common thing, but the reason you hear so many stories about it is because people who really will die without immediate intervention wait until the last second to come in for help. Surgeon. Seconded. I can't tell you how many people will know something is majorly wrong and wait until they're on death's doorstep to get it looked at. The conversation then proceeded about a lady who was shitting out of her vagina for 3 months and somehow survived, and it was only known when she came into the ER for her foot rotting off due to diabetes. They use a lot of big words I don't know, but that's the gist of the story. Gross. I'm not an ER nurse, however, I am a recovering acute myeloid leukemia patient. I was told that my prognosis wasn't ideal by very skilled and cagey communicators. I picked up on my care team's careful wording very early on. They never made declarations like, you only have a certain time frame. Making promises and definite declarations opens them up to lawsuits, so they do need to be careful about what they say. The only time anyone came close to saying, 1 more minute and you'll be dead, is when I was preparing to have a bone marrow transplant. Unfortunately, the PRIMPT testing showed that my leukemia had come raging back. I remember the initial phone call I had with one of my oncologists after the new wave of cancer was discovered. He repeatedly apologized, told me that sometimes he needs to just sit in his car and scream in frustration. Bless him, I can't imagine the stress he works under. I would scream in my car too, while we discussed next steps. Reading between the lines, I definitely understood that no oncologist apologizes like that unless they feel like they have failed. Years later, he disclosed that he was shocked I made it to remission. Maybe I didn't, and still don't ask the right questions in the right manner to elicit a dramatic response, but this has just been my experience while living with a severe illness. I don't know if mine really counts, but when my son was 11 months old, he started having respiratory issues. We called the on-call pediatrician and he tried to explain the whole sucking on the abdomen, and if it got to that, then to bring him in. This was at like 9 p.m. on a Saturday night. I stayed up all night with him, while he coughed and didn't sleep and didn't drink any milk. At 8 a.m. the next morning, I took him to my nearest urgent care. They sent me to a different urgent care. I went to that, and the PA gave him a breathing treatment. At this point, his oxygen level was at 82%. Oof. I knew absolutely nothing about what this meant at the time. The PA said it was up to us if we wanted to take him to the hospital or not. He was completely casual about the whole situation and didn't express any sort of concern. So we didn't think to be concerned either. We decided that we would take him to the hospital just to be safe and opted to call an ambulance because the nearest hospital was 30 minutes away. Thank God we did. When the EMTs arrived, they were shocked at the lack of concern, and he immediately insisted that we rush to the nearest children's hospital with lights and sirens. As we were driving, my son started to lose consciousness. It's been 4 years, and even as I'm typing this story, I have chills. I don't know what would have happened if any different decisions were made that day, and I'll never forgive myself for not taking it seriously sooner. We visited the hospital several more times with him, and he was diagnosed with asthma. I will say we learned to take it seriously, and the following hospital visits caught it very early. I'm in the UK and will say to patients, I'm glad you came in or you left this to the last minute, but I don't mean to the literal last minute on the whole. If it's that touch and go, people usually do lose their pulse. Plenty of people go into cardiac arrest on the ambulance or while being wheeled in. I've never had someone come in peri-arrest and got them immediate treatment where I'm like, phew, that saved them from the brink. But some people who have had fantastic responses, known aneurysm payment collapses and ambulance on scene within 3 minutes, they tell A&E they're coming in, and we let the vascular team know, and they start letting theater staff know. Patients spend 7 minutes in our department getting blood tests, including transfusion match samples, cannula, consent for surgery, and handshake from surgeons before being whipped upstairs and surviving. And stuff like this, every minute counts, but I'm never like 1 minute later would have been the last minute, but I guess I don't think you had another 15 minutes or an hour to spare had the same ring. My dad had a food truck chicken sandwich years ago in the 80s. He was a long-haul truck driver driving home from Quebec to the Maritimes of Canada, and he started to get crampy, pulled his fully loaded tractor-trailer, lumber flatbed, off to the shoulder of the Trans-Canada Highway and got out to urinate in front of the grill. Said blood was pouring out of his urine. He managed to get back in the truck and got it going again, and not very much longer he got severe pain in his lower belly. So bad he couldn't push the clutch in all the way. He used the CB radio to try to get someone, but being Quebec, everyone was speaking French, and he did not parler. He finally got one guy to answer, and Dad told him that he wasn't sure what's wrong, but he don't know where the hospital was or if he could get to it in the big rig. Guy told him to make it, exit whatever it was, and he'd meet up with him and an ambulance. Guy was a truck running alongside my dad by this point, having caught up to him. He'd radioed dispatch who called emergency services. By that point, Dad was getting weaker and weaker and wasn't able to get the truck to come to a halt. The other trucker moved his box trailer in front of Dad, who'd managed to gear down, having never truly gotten up to speed, and Dad deliberately ran into the back of the other driver, coming to a halt. Ambulance arrived, and off he went to Campbellton, NB, and into surgery for a perforated bowel and blood loss from a chicken bone in the sandwich. The surgeon told Mum that Dad was about 30 minutes from bleeding out had he not made it to care.